In this unit, we're looking at Chapter 10 in Ballantyne and Hammock, which is on the system of higher education in the U.S. I think one of the best ways to introduce this chapter is to give you a few descriptions of the types of higher education we have in the U.S. There are basically three types of colleges and universities. You've got private, not-for-profit institutions like the University of Denver. Your Ivy League schools are private, not-for-profit. So that's Harvard, Yale, Princeton, etc. And schools like Vanderbilt and Wake Forest. I got my doctorate from one of these kinds of schools, Emory University, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. Next, you've got public not-for-profit institutions. These are your state schools, like the University of Colorado, the University of North Carolina, Florida State University. Plus, pretty much all community colleges are public not-for-profit schools. Basically, any school that receives funding beyond tuition scholarships from the state or federal government falls into this category. Now, there are some schools that are kind of a hybrid between these first two, called land-grant colleges, or land-grant universities. This group includes schools like Michigan State University and Colorado State University. They got their start from the Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890, which granted federally controlled lands to these schools to use not only to have a place to build a university, but also so the value of the land could be counted as an asset as part of each school's endowment. An endowment is like a big savings or investment account that a school keeps tucked away, the goal of which is to use the interest earned on investing that money to help fund the school. Anyway, these schools operate with less state oversight than the purely public institutions, which is why a lot of researchers refer to them as hybrids between private and public schools. The land-grant institutions started out primarily to teach agriculture, farming, and mechanical trades. But as you are all probably aware by now, the scope of each of these schools has broadened dramatically over the last century and a half, to the point where these schools compete among the biggest public universities in the U.S. Texas A&M, for example, has the title Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University, but it's clearly more than just agricultural and mechanical now. The last category of colleges and universities is also the newest form, and these are public for-profit universities, which includes the University of Phoenix, Kaplan University, DeVry Institutes, ITT Tech, all the kinds of schools you see advertised on late-night television. Marketed mostly to adults working full-time who want a degree and move beyond their current jobs. Now, on the surface, there's nothing really wrong with these schools. You may have heard some stories in the news about unethical recruiting practices and accreditation problems, and I don't know that such an issue has been resolved to all parties' satisfaction yet. In short, these schools have a reputation for not having as rigorous academic standards as the other types of schools I just described. And they have a reputation of caring more about earning a profit than in educating their students. Regardless of those reputations, the difference between the for-profits, as they're known, and the public and private not-for-profit schools is really a philosophical difference. When the for-profits first started popping up around the country, starting as far back as the 1970s, education was seen mostly, not always, but mostly, as a means of bettering oneself. Education for the sake of knowledge, but not necessarily just as a credential to get a job. But also around that time, we started to see a shift in the job market to where it was becoming more and more of a requirement to have a college degree as a credential for getting a decent job. John Sperling, who founded the University of Phoenix in the 1970s, rationalized that if education was going to be used as a commodity for getting a job, then it might as well be bought and sold like any other commodity. He expanded his campuses, he created a parent company called the Apollo Group, took the company public, and now you can watch its stock price on the NASDAQ, just like you can watch the stocks of Kaplan and DeVry. Okay, Chapter 10 in Ballantyne and Hammock gives you a much better overview of the history of the development of higher ed in the U.S., much better than I have time for now, and it's really kind of a fascinating story, so I highly recommend digging into that. There's also a good section on the functions of universities. Being a student now, you probably understand a number of these functions already, but maybe you don't know as much about the role of universities in research. Maybe you've thought universities were just places where teachers taught and students learned. There's a lot more to a university than that. So check that out in Chapter 10. You'll see a lot of other themes we've talked about so far this term, including roles and responsibilities in higher education, higher ed as a bureaucratic organization, environmental pressures on higher ed, and so on. Some of these will seem similar to what we've discussed at the K-12 level, but many will be very different. One thing is for sure, higher ed is a beast all unto itself, so that's why we're devoting an entire chapter to it. We could devote an entire semester to understanding it and still not have all the answers. But at least we can scratch the surface, and I can enlighten you with what we discuss. So that's it for me for now. Have a good week, and I'll see you online.